What if you woke up tomorrow and your president was gone? Not voted out, not resigned, but taken.
Moving moment by moment out of Venezuela, the de facto leader there has now for the first time appeared on camera, demanding the immediate release of Nicolas Maduro.
So we are going to run the country.
In a foreign operation that shocked the world, overnight, a nation was placed under emergency rule. Soldiers flooded the streets. Curfews were imposed. Some people celebrated. Others called it an invasion. The United Nations held emergency talks. Russia and China issued fierce warnings. And one question echoed louder than all the others. Was this justice or something far more dangerous? Because what happened in Venezuela wasn't just about one man. It may have quietly rewritten the rules of global power. On January 3, 2026, the world woke up to one of the most shocking geopolitical headlines in decades. Reports began flooding in that the United States had launched a direct military operation inside Venezuela, striking targets in and around Caracas, and capturing the country's sitting president, Nicolás Maduro, along with his wife. For many people, this news felt unreal. The idea that a U.S. military operation could remove a foreign head of state from power overnight raised immediate questions. What really happened? Why now? And what does this mean for Venezuela, the United States, and the rest of the world? To understand how we got here, we need to rewind. For years, Venezuela has been locked in a deep political and economic crisis. One of the wealthiest countries in Latin America, Venezuela saw its economy collapse under a combination of mismanagement, corruption, falling oil production, and international sanctions. Hyperinflation wiped out savings. Millions of Venezuelans fled the country in one of the largest migration crises in modern history. At the center of this crisis was Nicolás Maduro, who took power after the death of Hugo Chavez. Maduro's presidency was immediately controversial. Opposition groups accused him of rigging elections, silencing dissent, and using the military to stay in power. Western governments, including the United States, refused to recognize several of his election victories as legitimate. Over time, tensions escalated. The U.S. imposed heavy sanctions targeting Venezuela's oil industry, government officials, and financial institutions. American officials accused Maduro and members of his inner circle of running what they described as a narco-state, a government allegedly tied to large-scale drug trafficking and organized crime. Despite years of pressure, sanctions, and diplomatic isolation, Maduro remained in power. Until, suddenly, he didn't. Operation began just after 2 a.m. local time. The operation combined air power, intelligence surveillance, and special forces. Key military installations were hit first: radar systems, air defense sites, and command centers, designed to limit Venezuela's ability to respond. Shortly after the strikes began, special forces were inserted into Caracas. Their objective was specific and narrow: locate Nicolás Maduro, secure him, and extract him from the country as quickly as possible. According to U.S. officials, the operation lasted only a few hours. By sunrise, Maduro and his wife were reportedly in U.S. custody and en route out of Venezuela. Within days, they appeared in a U.S. federal court in New York. The U.S. government immediately framed the operation not as an act of war, but as a law enforcement action. American officials stated that Maduro had been indicted on charges including narco-terrorism, drug trafficking, and weapons offenses, and that the operation was designed to bring a criminal defendant to justice. Maduro, for his part, rejected these claims. Through his lawyers, he pleaded not guilty and declared himself a prisoner of war, arguing that the operation violated international law and Venezuela's sovereignty. While the capture itself dominated headlines, the human cost of the operation quickly became a major concern. Initial reports suggested that dozens of people were killed during the strikes and ground operations. These included Venezuelan military personnel and foreign advisors who had been stationed in the country. Exact casualty numbers remain unclear. Independent verification is difficult, and both sides accuse the other of exaggerating or downplaying the toll. What is clear is that the operation had immediate consequences for civilians living in affected areas, adding to the fear and instability already gripping the country. Military units were mobilized across major cities. Curfews were imposed in some areas, and checkpoints appeared overnight. With Maduro gone, interim leadership was announced, but uncertainty spread quickly. Some Venezuelans celebrated, seeing Maduro's removal as the end of a long and painful chapter. Others were outraged, viewing the operation as a foreign invasion and an attack on national sovereignty. Protests broke out on both sides, and reports emerged of journalists being detained and communications restricted. Beyond Venezuela's borders, the global reaction was immediate and intense. An emergency session of the United Nations was called. Several countries condemned the U.S. action as a violation of international law, warning that it set a dangerous precedent. Nations like Russia and China accused the United States of using military force to achieve political goals. Other governments took a more cautious stance. While some acknowledged Maduro's controversial rule and alleged crimes, they questioned whether the operation was legal or justified under international norms. Even among U.S. allies, there was concern about escalation and long-term consequences. One issue kept coming up again and again: oil. Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world. For decades, control over its energy resources has been a central factor in global geopolitics. Critics of the operation argued that strategic and economic interests may have played a role, despite U.S. claims that the mission was purely about law enforcement and justice. Supporters of the operation pushed back against that narrative, arguing that Venezuela's oil industry had already collapsed and that the focus was on dismantling a criminal network rather than securing resources. Regardless of motivation, the reality is that Venezuela's future is now deeply uncertain. Maduro's legal battle in the United States could take years. Governance, stability, and legitimacy. Who truly holds power now? Will elections be held? Will sanctions be lifted or tightened further? And can the country avoid sliding into further unrest? There are also broader implications. This operation has reopened debates about international law, sovereignty, and the limits of military power. If one country can capture another nation's leader and justify it as law enforcement, what does that mean for the global order? For many observers, this moment marks a turning point, not just for Venezuela, but for how powerful nations choose to act on the world stage. What happens next will depend on decisions made in courtrooms, government offices, and on the streets of Venezuela itself. The consequences of this operation are still unfolding, and its full impact may not be known for years. One thing is certain, this was not just another headline. This was a historic event that reshaped Venezuela overnight and sent shockwaves around the world. And as the story continues to develop, staying informed and questioning every narrative matters more than ever. As the dust begins to settle, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Venezuela has entered a chapter with no clear ending. Nicolás Maduro may now be fighting his battle in U.S. courtrooms, but the consequences of his removal are being felt thousands of miles away, on the streets of Caracas, in government offices, and inside ordinary homes. Interim leadership promises stability, but history tells us that transitions born from force are rarely simple. Who decides legitimacy now? Is it the interim government, the military, the people in the streets, or foreign powers watching closely from afar? Elections have been discussed, but not scheduled. Sanctions may be lifted or intensified, and the economy, already fragile, waits in limbo. For Venezuelans, the uncertainty is exhausting. For the world, it's unsettling, because this operation did something bigger than removing a leader. It reopened a question many believed was settled after the 20th century. Where does law enforcement end and imperial power begin? Supporters argued this was justice finally catching up, that no leader should be untouchable, that corruption and alleged crimes must have consequences, no matter how high the office. Critics argue something else entirely, that sovereignty was crossed, that international law was bent or broken, and that if one nation can remove another country's leader under the banner of justice, then no nation is truly safe from the same precedent. This is why the world is watching so closely, not just because Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, but because the rules themselves may have changed. Today, it's Venezuela. Tomorrow, it could be someone else. Moments like this don't always feel historic when they happen. They feel chaotic, confusing, unresolved. But years from now, historians may point to this moment and say, this is where the global order shifted, quietly but permanently. For Venezuela, the road ahead is uncertain. For the world, the implications are profound. And for all of us watching from the outside, one responsibility remains: to question every narrative, to look beyond headlines, and to understand that power, once used, rarely sets the same limits again. Because this wasn't just another news story. It was a warning, a turning point, and the consequences are still unfolding.
Horrible, horrible, o sea.
Pues llama a mi mamá.
Ven acá, no se metan para acá, no sabemos qué hay ahí que se trate.